What's up? I'm Matthew. This episode is about influencers who let their content brain completely override their survival instincts on the highest mountain on Earth. We're going from a woman who stopped at 28,700 feet to reshoot her summit speech, to a man who swapped out his certified equipment for cheap knockoffs, which ironically turned out to be the most expensive decision he ever made on that mountain. It was May 19th, 2016. The south col of Mount Everest sits at 26,000 feet, and if you've never heard of it, it's basically the last camp before the summit, a flat, wind-blasted plateau where the air has about a third of the oxygen you'd breathe at sea level. That morning the sky was clear, temperatures around minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill dragging it even lower. The summit was visible from camp, and I know that sounds like a good sign. It really wasn't. So here's who Darexavel was. 31 years old, wellness creator, the kind of person who built an audience by doing hard things and filming them. Cold plunges, extended fasts, high altitude hikes. The whole brand was built around the idea that discomfort is a choice, and most people just aren't willing to push through it. Everest was supposed to be the proof. The ultimate episode. She had summited two 6,000-meter peaks before this, which sounds like solid experience. Until you realize the death zone on Everest starts right around where those mountains top out. She joined a commercial expedition as a paying client, showed up with her gear, her camera, and a summit speech she had written and rehearsed for weeks. A scripted speech. Who does that and genuinely thinks it's going to go fine? Now, before we get into what happened, you need to understand something about the death zone. Above 26,000 feet, your body is not maintaining, it is declining. Every minute you spend up there, especially standing still, your core temperature drops, your oxygen saturation drops, your ability to think clearly drops. It's not dramatic, it's just math. And because of that math, guided expeditions set a hard turnaround time, usually between 1 and 2 p.m. No exceptions, no negotiations, regardless of whether you've hit the summit or not. The mountain doesn't care how close you are. Miss that window and you are not getting down safely. That's just how it works. Darexa was already behind schedule before she even got to the hard part. Her Sherpa clocked it at the balcony, 27,600 feet, where she was running about 40 minutes slower than she needed to be. She reached the south summit sometime around midday, just barely inside the window, and right there her Sherpa gave her the options. Push straight to the true summit or turn around. What she could not do, what the situation physically would not allow, was stop and film. So she stopped and filmed. First take, wind noise. Second take, her buff was sitting wrong across her face. She fixed it, reviewed the footage on her camera screen, reset, went again. Her Sherpa warned her. She kept going. Warned her a second time. She kept going. By take 11, she was finally happy with it. Which makes me wonder, what exactly is going through your head on take 9? Take 10? At 28,700 feet, what are you telling yourself? She reached the true summit well past the cutoff. The time-stamped footage later confirmed she had burned through nearly an hour and a half at the south summit alone. The descent started immediately, but her body had already been losing the battle the entire time she was standing still in the cold running takes. By the Hillary step she was stumbling on the fixed ropes. Her Sherpa was getting single-word answers to questions. Not a good sign at any altitude. Genuinely terrifying at this one. Not long after, she sat down on the ridge just below the step. Her Sherpa tried to get her back up, tried to physically support her and move her, but one person cannot carry a non-ambulatory adult at 28,000 feet. It's just not physically possible up there. She lost consciousness roughly 30 minutes after sitting down. No fall, no sudden event. She sat down, and that was it. I think if she had turned around at take 3, even take 5, we're probably not talking about her right now. The Sherpa radioed base camp shortly after she became unresponsive. A second Sherpa was sent up from Camp 4 but didn't reach her before dark. Helicopter rescue above 26,000 feet isn't viable. There's nothing anyone could do from the outside. Every option had already closed. The recovery team reached her the next morning and found her exactly where she had stopped. Still seated, still leaning against the ridge. The mountain had just held her there overnight. Recovery wasn't attempted given the location and conditions. Her camera was pulled from her jacket on site. Memory card intact. All 11 takes of the summit speech were on it, along with time-stamped footage that confirmed exactly how long she had been standing still at the south summit. That timestamp laid out the entire sequence without a single word needing to be said. Her death was ruled hypothermia, secondary to prolonged exposure above 28,000 feet. Delayed descent and physical exhaustion were listed as contributing factors. The expedition's incident report noted the turnaround advisory had been given twice and declined both times. The case was closed. Darixa came to Everest to get the perfect take. 11 tries in, she got it. She just never got to use it. It was April 28, 2015. The Khumbu Valley was still unsettled. 3 days earlier, the Gorkha earthquake had torn through Nepal and sent shockwaves up the mountain that scattered teams, collapsed sections of the icefall, and killed climbers at base camp. But higher on the mountain, above the immediate chaos, a narrow weather window had cracked open. A handful of teams were still moving, and one climber in particular was moving fast. Not because of the window, but because of someone else. Zoran Ashby was the kind of guy who turned everything into a competition. 27 years old, fitness creator, built his whole channel around one idea, that most people are just soft. No excuses, no rest days, no slow and steady. He had learned sometime before the summit push that another creator he had publicly positioned himself against was on the mountain with a separate expedition and was ahead of him in acclimatization rotations. So Zoran pushed for the summit after completing only one rotation to Camp 2 instead of the standard 2. His expedition leader flagged it. Zoran said he felt fine. He had summited peaks up to 6,400 meters before, never anything close to Everest, and I think he genuinely believed his fitness would cover the gap. That's the thing about the mountain. It doesn't care how strong you are. Here's something most people don't think about when it comes to high-altitude climbing. Acclimatization isn't optional, it's biological. Your body needs time to adjust to the drop in oxygen pressure, and there's no shortcut for that process, regardless of fitness level. Skip the rotations, and you're essentially rolling the dice on whether your body can cope with what's coming. The symptoms of a body that can't cope start subtle. A cough, some breathlessness, fatigue, easy to dismiss, easy to push through if pushing through is your whole identity. The problem is that above 23,000 feet, subtle doesn't stay subtle for long. At Camp 3, 24,500 feet, Zoran developed a persistent cough he told his Sherpa was just the dry air. His expedition doctor at base camp picked up on something during a radio check and recommended he descend for observation. Zoran declined. He cited his rival's position on the mountain. That night he slept badly, and by morning his lips had taken on a faint bluish tint his Sherpa recognized immediately. Reminds me of other cases I've covered where everyone around the victim saw it, coming before the victim did. And still, he packed up and pushed toward Camp 4. At what point do you stop calling it confidence and start calling it something else? He didn't make it far. Within 2 hours of leaving Camp 3, he had fallen well behind the group. The Sherpa behind him noted his pace had become slow and irregular. His breathing had changed too. The Sherpa could hear it, a wet, crackling sound with each exhale, the kind that doesn't come from dry air or exertion. At around 25,800 feet, he stopped moving and sat down on his pack. His Sherpa reached him within minutes. Zoran was conscious but confused. Couldn't answer what day it was. Couldn't track a simple question. His oxygen saturation read 48% on the Sherpa's pulse oximeter. To put that in context, a healthy person at sea level sits around 95 to 99%. Even accounting for altitude, 48% is critical. Fluid had filled a significant portion of both lungs. He could not stand without help. 2 Sherpas began a new, immediate descent with him, supported between them. He lost consciousness before they had covered much ground. CPR was performed on the slope for 14 minutes. He didn't respond. 14 minutes on a near vertical slope at 25,000 feet. I want you to think about what that actually looks like. Base camp was notified and a helicopter evacuation was requested, but weather conditions in the valley, still unstable in the days following the earthquake, made a high-altitude extraction impossible that morning. The team held position for 2 hours before confirming he had no pulse. His body was evacuated by helicopter 2 days later when conditions finally allowed it. I've covered deaths that were sudden and deaths that were slow. This one sits somewhere uncomfortable in between because there was a clear window where he could have turned around and chose not to. The postmortem confirmed bilateral pulmonary edema as cause of death. Both lungs had accumulated fluid, consistent with rapid ascent without adequate acclimatization. His camera was recovered at Camp 3. The last thing on it was a clip filmed the morning of his final push, him visibly struggling to finish sentences, breathless between every few words. The expedition's radio logs confirmed the descent recommendation had been issued and declined roughly 18 hours before he died. The case was ruled accidental, with self-directed deviation from the acclimatization protocol listed as the primary contributing factor. Zoran had spent years telling his audience that the body could handle anything if the mind was strong enough. Everest answered that one for him. It was May 23rd, 2017. The upper mountain was clear, one of those rare summit windows that pulls every waiting team out of their tents at once. The south col was crowded, fixed ropes above the balcony were moving slowly under the weight of traffic, and temperatures at the summit that morning were sitting around minus 29 degrees Fahrenheit. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be in a line of people all quietly racing the same clock, that's the south col on a good weather day. Everyone up there knows the window. Everyone up there is counting. Kelso Prynne had a different kind of count going. 34 years old, content creator, built his whole thing around firsts. First to broadcast live from extreme locations. First to put his audience inside moments nobody had streamed before. Everest was his largest production yet, and he had secured paid access from his audience to watch a live summit broadcast, his primary revenue event for the year. He had reached high altitude before on Aconcagua without serious incident, and I think that probably gave him more confidence than the situation actually warranted. He arrived with a custom-rigged satellite broadcast pack that shared a battery system with his heated glove liners, a setup his own technician had flagged as a power management risk before departure. Kelso noted it and moved on. Someone had already seen it coming, so what was he thinking? Here's the thing about summit day on Everest. You're basically running a race where the finish line is also the halfway point. You push through the night, hit the top, and then you still have to get all the way back down before the mountain decides it's done cooperating. Every team on that col knew the drill. Kelso knew it too. He just had a live audience to keep happy on top of all that, and that's where things started getting complicated. The live stream kicked off at Camp 4 and ran straight through the ascent. Battery pack was drawing more power than anticipated. Lithium batteries lose significant efficiency below freezing, something that hadn't been properly accounted for at that altitude. The drain was happening the entire time, quietly, steadily, with every hour of broadcast. By the time Kelso reached the balcony at 27,600 feet, his heated glove liners had dropped to minimal function. He noticed his fingertips were numb. He kept moving. He didn't switch off the broadcast. People had paid for it, and he wasn't about to cut the feed with the summit still above him. I get the logic, but the mountain was already collecting on that decision, and he had no idea. He reached the summit and broadcast from the top for close to 20 minutes. By any measure, that's the moment the whole expedition was built around. What nobody watching could see was that his hands were already in serious trouble. The glove system had been effectively dead for hours. He turned around and started down, and that's when the full weight of it started to show. The descent required heavy Sherpa assistance because Kelso could not grip the fixed ropes properly. Not struggling, could not grip. He reached Camp 4 by early afternoon, and the expedition medic at base camp pushed hard for an immediate helicopter evacuation. Both hands were waxy, pale, hardening across all fingers. Kelso refused. He had announced a post-summit recovery series during the live stream, and he intended to film it from base camp. He wasn't going anywhere. And this, right here, is where the story stops being about equipment failure and turns into something else entirely. He spent 2 nights at Camp 4 before working his way down to base camp over the following days. 4 days after summiting, by the time he got there, both hands had visible tissue discoloration, skin beginning to blister. He was evacuated to a lower altitude medical facility, but not because he agreed to go. The expedition leader overrode his refusal and arranged transport. By the time he reached medical care, the infection had spread well beyond his hands. Surgical intervention was attempted. It wasn't enough. Kelso Prynne died 9 days after standing on the summit of Everest. 9 days. He survived the climb, survived the descent, made it all the way back to base camp, and then died from something that was entirely preventable if he had just left when he was told to. The findings confirmed septic shock as cause of death, secondary to bilateral deep frostbite with critically delayed treatment. The report was blunt about it. Evacuation within 24 hours of descent would have significantly changed the outcome. I think about that a lot. 24 hours was all the margin there was between a bad outcome and a survivable one. Battery drain logs from the broadcast rig confirmed the power crossover failure. The glove system had been running well below effective output long before he reached the summit. The live stream footage was reviewed and the timeline reconstructed from it. The expedition's formal report noted that evacuation had been recommended and refused on 2 separate occasions before the leader stepped in. The case was closed as accidental death, delayed treatment listed as the determining factor. We're not done yet. Story 4 is coming up, and trust me, you're going to want to see how this one plays out. And if you're not subscribed to Dark Ascent yet, now's a good time. You're clearly already here for it. It was May 14th, 2016. Camp 4 on the South Col sat at 26,000 feet under a high-pressure system that had held for 3 days. a rare and coveted summit window. Tents were packed across the flat, wind-scoured plateau, and most climbers were horizontal, rationing oxygen, conserving everything they had for the midnight push. The kind of stillness up there isn't peaceful. It's calculated. Everyone is saving something. In one tent, a camera was running. Emmerich Quill was 29. He ran an adventure and survival channel built entirely on staged content, faked bear encounters, scripted river rescues, a desert survival scenario that his audience ate up without question. The formula was simple. Manufacture the danger, film the reaction, post it. It worked. Everest was supposed to be the biggest production he'd ever pulled off. He arrived with 2 cameras, a detailed shot list, and a plan for what he wanted to film at every single camp on the mountain. He had climbed to just over 6,000 meters on Denali 2 years prior, which gave him enough credibility to get onto a commercial expedition as a paying client. What he hadn't told the expedition leader was just how much filming he intended to do up there. That omission ended up costing him everything. If there's one thing that separates Everest from every other climb on Earth, it's the oxygen situation. Above 26,000 feet, your body is running on borrowed time and borrowed air. Most climbers use supplemental oxygen from Camp 4 all the way through the summit push and back, a flow rate of around 2 to 4 liters per minute, rationed carefully across bottles that last roughly 6 to 8 hours each at low flow. The margin is tight. There's no room to waste it, no room to miscalculate, and absolutely no room to burn through it, doing something that has nothing to do with getting up and back, down alive. While every other climber at Camp 4 was resting and conserving, Emmerich was setting up a shot. He had a tent-mate act unconscious while he filmed a rescue sequence, dragging him across the coal, performing mock CPR, the whole thing. The shoot ran for close to 90 minutes. He was on oxygen the entire time and putting out real physical effort at 26,000 feet, which burns through a supply faster than just sitting still. He didn't track how much he was using. Who does that? Who burns through oxygen at 26,000 feet to film a fake rescue and just doesn't keep count? When he checked his bottles before the midnight departure, his regulator gauge was stiff from the cold, and he misread it, believing he had more than he did. He left with a group at 11:40 p.m. Nobody knew what he had already used. He moved well through the lower section of the push. Nothing about his pace raised any flags early on. By the balcony at 27,600 feet, he switched to his second bottle. It ran out faster than expected. At around 28,200 feet, just below the south summit, he signaled to his Sherpa that his oxygen had stopped. The bottle was empty. A spare wasn't available. The expedition's cache had already been allocated to another climber who had experienced a regulator failure lower on the route. Without supplemental oxygen above 28,000 feet, the body deteriorates fast. Not gradually, fast. Emmerich sat down. Within 20 minutes, he was unresponsive to verbal commands. His Sherpa attempted to move him, but he was fully dead weight within 30 minutes of oxygen loss. A second Sherpa reached them shortly after. Emmerich had no pulse. Base camp was notified immediately. No viable rescue option existed at that altitude and time. The 2 Sherpas began a careful descent without the body. Recovery wasn't possible in the immediate term. Here's what gets me about this one. Emmerich didn't die because of a storm, or a fall, or bad luck. He died in a sequence he personally built, piece by piece, hours before he ever left for the summit. The staged rescue scene, the oxygen he burned without tracking, the gauge he misread in the cold. Pull any one of those out and maybe he makes it back. Together they didn't leave him a chance. His body was recovered later that season and moved off the main route. His camera was found in his jacket. Footage on it included the full staged rescue sequence filmed at Camp 4, time-stamped the evening before his death. Oxygen consumption was reconstructed from bottle weights recovered at the scene, confirming he had used roughly 40% more than planned before the push even began. The cause of death was listed as anoxia secondary to oxygen supply depletion at extreme altitude. The expedition's incident report noted non-essential physical exertion and untracked oxygen consumption at Camp 4 as the primary contributing factors. No foul play, no equipment failure. Just a man who treated the death zone like a film set and ran out of time to figure out the difference. It was May 7th, 2014. The Lhotse face, a 4,000-foot wall of blue glacial ice rising from Camp 2 toward Camp 3, was in its standard early May condition. Hard, steep, and completely unforgiving. Fixed ropes ran the full length of it, anchored at intervals into the ice. Temperature on the face that morning was sitting around -15 degrees Fahrenheit with moderate wind. For most teams, it was a routine rotation day. For one climber, it was the last morning of his life. Kalen Riker was 33, and his whole channel was built on one thing: gear. Reviews, comparisons, recommendations. Brands paid him to feature their equipment because his audience actually trusted what he said. That trust was the entire business. For the Everest expedition, he had received a full kit sponsorship covering ascenders, carabiners, harness, and crampons, all rated and certified for high altitude use. Before departing, he returned the certified ascender and primary carabiner set to the sponsors, kept the reimbursement value, and sourced cheaper, non-certified replacements from an online supplier. Told nobody. He had climbed to 6,000 meters before and figured the swap was low risk. The gear looked identical, and that was the whole idea. I've covered a lot of cases where the decision that kills someone happens weeks before they ever get into trouble. This is one of those. So here's what an ascender actually does. It's a mechanical device that grips a fixed rope and lets you move upward on it. On a near vertical ice face, it's essentially what keeps you on the mountain. The cam mechanism inside has to work reliably in extreme cold, and that's exactly what certified gear is rated for. Cheaper non-certified versions are built to lower tolerances, weaker springs, inferior alloys, and in sub-zero temperatures, those tolerances can give out in ways you can't predict and can't recover from. On a 45-degree ice face, that kind of failure doesn't come with a warning. It just happens. During the first rotation to Camp 2, Kalen noticed his ascender felt a little stiff, but worked it manually and kept going. He even filmed a short kit review clip at Camp 2. The non-certified ascender right there in the footage, and he's naming the certified brand on camera without missing a beat. Didn't even hesitate. On the second rotation toward Camp 3 on May 7th, the overnight temperature drop had stiffened the cam mechanism even further. He was about 1,100 feet above Camp 2 on the Lhotse face when he stopped to adjust his pack. Completely routine. The kind of stop you make without thinking about it. He unweighted his ascender to reposition it higher on the rope. Standard move. Every climber on that face does it constantly. The cam didn't re-engage. He put his full body weight onto it, assuming it had locked. It hadn't. The ascender slipped down the rope before he even registered what was happening, and by then his weight was already committed. He, Amaya, grabbed the fixed rope with his right hand, but it was iced over and his glove couldn't get enough grip. He went backward off the face. The fall ran roughly 300 feet before the fixed rope system caught him, but the arrest was violent. He hit the ice face during the fall and came to a stop against the rope anchor. A climbing team below saw the whole thing and reached him within 15 minutes. He was alive but unresponsive, visible head trauma, suspected spinal injury. He died before any descent could be organized. The witness team radioed base camp straight away. A helicopter was dispatched, but the Lhotse face doesn't allow for landing. It could only observe. Getting him off that face with the personnel on hand wasn't realistic. He was confirmed dead at the scene about 40 minutes after the fall. Here's the thing about this case that I find hard to shake. The fraud didn't come out on the mountain. It came out after. The ascender was recovered with the body and examined by the expedition's equipment team. Non-certified product, completely inconsistent with the brand Kalen had been claiming to use. Sponsor records confirmed the certified gear had been returned before he even left. The swap was deliberate, it was documented, and it was fatal. The camera footage from Camp 2 was recovered and reviewed. That kit review clip where he's holding the counterfeit gear and naming the certified brand is sitting right there in the incident record. Cause of death was listed as traumatic injuries consistent with a high-altitude fall. Equipment failure cited as the primary contributing factor. The gear discrepancy was formally documented and passed to the relevant authorities. No ambiguity, no loose ends. He had built an entire channel on the credibility of his gear recommendations, pocketed the budget that was supposed to keep him alive, and the mountain collected what was owed.